At this time, we have another fantastic local boy, as I said, born and brought up here. So I'm going to, the one promise I'm going to make is I'm going to speak the least and let him speak the most. We're going to learn more about all about his entrepreneurial journey and everything. We'll probably chat for about 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for all of you to ask any questions. So it's up close and personal with Hal tonight. So until then, if by the way, the restrooms are at the back, and if you want to go replenish your beverage or anything, feel free to do so. And yeah, before, so quick thing about Hal. He was born and brought up here. He went to Lexington High School, and he's a double graduate from the University of South Carolina, both undergrad and grad. And then he left Columbia for about 20 years, been to all the 5 continents, or 6, however you count the Americas. And he did mention he didn't make it to Antarctica yet, so hopefully soon. And yeah, he has a ton of experience. So rather than me giving a bland introduction and as a monologue, we're going to dig it out all from him. Before that, we ended up finding Hal's video from his younger days, so we wanted to play that first. So go for it.
Karen knew me when I was younger.
That laugh, I don't know what it means, but that's Hal. Hal, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes.
That makes me cry.
Actually, that was played in 2010 at the TMC conference when my company, PacWest, we had a product that I had founded the team with called Telastic, and we won Product of the Year. So we needed something to really signify what is a startup, so that was it.
But there's like blinding resemblance to Hal. So
You're right.
Coming from another country, I thought that was him. So I thought I was interviewing Mick Jagger. We'll start off. Hal, first of all, thanks again for spending time and making time twice in a week. I've met with you and I've heard quite a bit about you. So obviously this is something, that was one of the reasons we realized, okay, he's the person who the community should know. He's back in Columbia now, and we need to showcase the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial spirit that you bring. So, but before we start, just so that all of us are on the same page, so what's your, from your perspective, what's an entrepreneur, what's entrepreneurship, what's a startup?
Okay, thanks, Raghav, and thanks to all of you for being here, and most importantly, for having, hopefully, a passionate interest in becoming an entrepreneur if you're not already, and if you are an entrepreneur, hopefully learning from some of the mistakes that I'm willing to tell you about tonight. But an entrepreneur to me is someone who has seen and recognized a need, and without any recourse about resources available, is willing to go out and try to fill that need. And it goes much deeper because I've had people in my career refer to me as an entrepreneur as weird, renegade, rebel, workaholic, demanding. But I've also had people refer to my teams as potentially able to change the world, teams that are able to really passionately create and innovate. So entrepreneurship is all of that. Also, an entrepreneur for me is someone who understands responsibility, and the responsibility aspect really gets to the basic level of recognizing that it's a personal responsibility. As an entrepreneur, you are responsible. Nothing happens unless you make it happen. An entrepreneur also is one that just effuses integrity and character. And I know we all have horror stories about people that we've worked with or been around that didn't have high standards, but entrepreneurs rise above that. So the integrity is very, very important. Entrepreneurs also recognize possibility. They recognize that 100% of the time, it's 100% possible, and therefore it goes back to the responsibility issue. I believe entrepreneurs also in this definition have a huge sense of urgency. They are just repulsed by the status quo. Entrepreneurs understand that you have to make things happen because others depend upon you. And you have to manage, lead, create, and innovate as though other people's life and livelihood depends upon you. That's entrepreneurial. And finally, I believe that entrepreneurs really understand risk. And understanding risk means that you are very comfortable being uncomfortable. So all of that sort of flows into what I think entrepreneurialism is. I also want to point out that I think that my experiences and observations are that most successful entrepreneurs probably don't become successful until they're in their late 30s or early 40s. Almost all of them have had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 just fall flat on the face, things didn't work out. And that's good because that's where the real seasoning comes. So I think that all of that together kind of adds up to what an entrepreneur is.
Thank you. By the way, I forgot to mention, having heard all about him, his story and everything, when I grow up, I want to be like him. So I just started off dressing like him. So if you can look at, so there you go.
It's the mirror.
And also, I'm glad I have some years left to be a successful entrepreneur. So glad to hear that. So you start off in the corporate world, and in most cases, and it's a recent fad, or I shouldn't say fad, but a recent trend where a lot of students right out of college have started being entrepreneurs. But in most cases, it's still people go into the workforce and then get into entrepreneurship. So how did the transition happen to you, or what was the trigger for you to say, okay, now I'm going to start on my own? And what was the motivation?
Well, you probably don't know this, but before I was with AT&T and Southern Bell, I was first an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur in grad school.
Right.
But I have to tell you what sparked the entrepreneurial drive in me, and I only knew this later on as I was able to look back. If any of you have ever had a paper route, I had a paper route, but I didn't have a normal paper route. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up in the 50s and the 60s, there was a weekly newspaper called Grit. And the Grit newspaper was not one that people subscribed to. So all of my buddies had gotten paper routes, and they were delivering papers and making a lot of money. So this Grit paper opportunity came up, and I discovered that I actually had to go and knock on a door and ask somebody to buy something. And that felt good. I enjoyed doing that. And I was 11 years old, so that began to spark an entrepreneurial flair in me. My father was an entrepreneur in the textile industry. And my mother, as a supportive wife, was an entrepreneur as a trailing spouse. But as I went to Carolina during my MBA period, as all MBAs typically have to do, you have to start a business on paper, and I did. And I decided that when I got out of school that I would make this work. So I opened a restaurant out near Dutch Square in late 72, 73 time frame. And I owned that restaurant for 4 years before I went to work for Southern Bell and AT&T. I will tell you that that restaurant taught me several things. Number one, I had no money. So how did I get money? And I used a combination of Strom Thurmond and Floyd Spence, my senator and my congressman in the SBA. I used a combination of friends and family supporting me with bank loans, and I got the money. But most importantly, I was able to locate a developer. He's since passed away, and he owned the property that I wanted to put my restaurant on. And I went to him and I said, I want you to build my restaurant. I don't have money, not much anyway. And I need for you to finance my leasehold improvements. I need for you to basically do a turnkey job for me. And for some reason, he liked me, and he did. And all he asked in return was that I pay my monthly lease and that every day that I give him a Heineken beer and a sandwich. And I did. And that's how I got into business. So that 4 years taught me an awful lot, but the real education came in understanding how do you make payroll? What do you do when an employee that you're depending upon doesn't show up? What do you do when the gasoline crunch of 75 and 76 hits and business goes like that? Those are the entrepreneurial wars that you learn at an early age when you do that. So that was my first entrepreneurial venture. I ended up selling the business because I did not want to be in the restaurant business. It's very, very hard work. And I didn't have the capital at the time to expand the restaurant.
Okay, so
then I went to work with AT&T.
Excellent. So is that how you got into the whole communications industry? You got your, how to say?
Luck has a lot to do with everything that you do in life. Mm-hmm. And I'm a firm believer in meritocracy and working hard and all the things that go with that. But luck does play a role in it. So the luck for me was, after I sold my restaurant, my brother and a cousin who were with Southern Bell, both have since retired, my brother calls me up and says, AT&T has hired this guy named Arch McGill. And he's bringing this really interesting concept to AT&T, and it's called industry marketing. And they're going to create a new position, and it's called account executive. And they're going to pattern this as after a brand manager at Procter & Gamble. So they're looking for MBA grads. They're looking for people that kind of get that. And my brother said, I think you ought to go interview. So he said, here's who you call. And I went, and they hired me on the spot. So that's how I got with AT&T.
Okay, and so you spent some time at AT&T and kind of getting to know the communications industry.
It was a wonderful thing. And I believe that one of the elements that we find missing in institutionalized corporate America today are the kinds of training programs and development programs that we saw companies like AT&T and Southern Bell provide to their employees. But during this time with AT&T, I came in as a sales support person because you have to learn the job. I was fortunate enough to move fairly rapidly to a salesperson, it was called account executive, and then to a sales manager, it was called industry manager. And my industry happened to be banking in South Carolina. Okay. And that happened to be at a time when multi-state banking and the banks of North Carolina were beginning to take off. So all of a sudden, my little team of people that I managed were quite successful. That led to me going to Denver, Colorado, and the same guy that had been hired from IBM put together a concept with the ATT National Sales School that said, well, Department of Justice has filed a suit against AT&T, and it's either going to be bifurcated, broken up into two companies, or it's going to really be totally deregulated. But to prepare for that, we've got to train every salesperson in the AT&T and Bell system how to competitively compete. And I was selected to be one of the first group that went out. And fortunately, things went very well, and I became the training manager of that school. And things went very well, and I went into Manhattan and ran national accounts for AT&T. And things went very well, and I got recruited post-divestiture to come back and run 2 states for Bell South Advanced Systems, Louisiana and Mississippi. And things went very well there. And I went back into headquarters as a VP of Bell South Communications, Inc., and that went very well, and I became President and Chief Operating Officer of Bell South Communications. That was a deregulated company that worked outside of the Bell South territory. We did some acquisitions and became a major reseller of Nortel product. Wonderful time.
I'm sure, Telecom was booming at that point of time. And
it was the crest.
Yeah, so that brings up a question which I interact with a lot of students, especially here, and I think when I was graduating, I had something similar kind of conundrum. Go straight into startups, start your own, and all. That's one path. The other, there's a certain amount, especially in this age with all the Zuckerberg and the movies and all the glamour of startups. There's a certain amount of disdain to get into corporate world before starting up, on your own. So, what's your take on, and what is it you could bring to your entrepreneurship from your corporate world?
It's a good question, and I believe that first of all, you can be very entrepreneurial working in corporate America, whether it's a large company, whether it's a mid-cap, or whether it is a small family business. So being entrepreneurial and being an entrepreneur need the same characteristics. I happen to think that unless you're incredibly lucky, incredibly blessed to have good advisors and mentors, it's very, very difficult to start without some level of experience. Most entrepreneurs, in my viewpoint, have had at least 6 to 10 years of business experience where you learn fundamentals. You learn, educationally, you learn the intellectual part of items. When you go out into the world, you learn about skills, knowledge, and attitude. You hopefully have gotten a lot of knowledge in school, but you get to apply that knowledge and you learn more. You learn the skills that you haven't learned. Most schools don't teach you how to sell. Most schools don't teach you how to give feedback to an employee. Most schools don't really teach you how to manage a P&L or manage a balance sheet or manage cash flow. You know how to model and how to create it. So I think it's very important to get those elements. So I believe if you're incredibly lucky and have the mentors and the advisors and the funding, it's good. And if you've got a really good idea, but we'll come to that later.
Yeah. So one is the idea, and we'll keep the luck aside for a bit. So let's talk about who played a significant role in your life as an influencer or a mentor, or who kind of led you into the entrepreneurial journey.
So in my corporate travels and also in my entrepreneurial travels, I've had the luck and good fortune to meet some very influential people. The first one that comes to mind is Nelson Mandela, who I met in July of 1996. And he was reciprocating for Queen Elizabeth for a state dinner, and he was staying at the Dorchester in London. And I was on a trip back from Hong Kong, and I had to stop over in London for some business. So I checked in, and I noticed a lot of people standing around in the lobby. And I was really pretty much out of sync in the time zone, so I didn't really know who was there. So I hop in the elevator and I look up, and President Mandela is standing beside me. And he put out his hand, and I shook his hand, and we chatted for just a few minutes. And in that very brief exposure, and I saw him again the next morning at breakfast, but in that very brief exposure, I saw a man who understood consensus. And consensus is not everybody has to agree. Consensus is everybody gets to talk, and you civilly discuss it. And then the best idea or the best approach is adopted. And I saw a man who embodied that, and that was very influential. That was 1996. That really helped me, particularly as I developed companies and built culture. Prior to that, actually after that, in 1999, I was at a Booz Allen, Hamilton, and Korn Ferry conference in Pebble Beach. And there was this really exciting CEO who had just left Novell, and he hadn't gone to his next position yet. And he and I happened to be paired together at this show as far as brainstorming and sitting at the table. His name was Eric Schmidt, who was the executive chairman of Google. So as I look back on that, I understand that I was being exposed to big data. I was being exposed to, if you can see it, you need to be able to identify it. If you can identify it, you need to be able to categorize it. If you can categorize it, you need to be able to index it. And had I listened more closely, I might have had a different luck pattern in my career. But that was very influential on me. Prior to that, in the 1980s, I had the good fortune to meet Steve Jobs. And Steve came into my New York office, and we had a contract through a joint venture company that I was doing. And this joint venture company was the developer with the parent real estate company for, it was Olympia, New York, for the World Financial Center in New York and the Canary Wharf complex in London. So we were on the front end of using touchscreen interactive terminals for information, for amenity in buildings, and tying this into signage and so forth. So the JV partner was a friend of Steve Jobs and brought him in, and we were sitting there looking at an Atari screen, which is what we were basically working from at the time. So prior to that, with AT&T in New York, I was fortunate to be on the front end through my national account responsibilities with two things that AT&T did that were very important. One was a contract it did with EDS, and it was a systems integration contract. Many of you probably don't even know who EDS is because it's not big like it was back in the 80s, but huge system integration company owned by Ross Perot. And we had also done a development of a computer and brought out what was called the 3B2 computer. So for the product announcement for the computer at the Essex Hotel, we brought in this young entrepreneur from Seattle by the name of Bill Gates. And I got to sit at the table with him. And again, I should have listened more closely than I did at the time. But these are people that had an influence on me at different stages in my career. Now, I do have some mentors along the way. I'll tell you that I don't mean this facetiously, I mean this literally. My mentors were madmen, without a doubt. These were guys that came out of World War II, Depression era, Korean War. Most of them had worked for IBM. Most of them wore olive drab suits, white shirts or blue shirts. And in after work entertainment, it was a martini and the cigarette and the ash dropping into it. But these guys truly, truly knew business. And they had the most impact on me. There were 4 of them. I still have scars. I love them all. But those 4 people, as we talk about some of the opportunities I've had and lessons learned, I'll relate this back to my madmen mentors.
Right. So,
but I say that lovingly.
We'll take your word for that. So when you say, and by the way, unlike you did with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, we are totally listening, everything you say. So for, again, most of the audience here, either want to be entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs or anything. So how, if you have to tell them how to go about finding opportunities or, the idea part and trying to diminish the luck part in the whole equation, how do you assess an opportunity?
Okay, so let's lay out a framework. First of all, if you're going to look for an idea, to be innovative and be creative, you have to be in an environment where innovation and creativity is encouraged and where you are able to be that, not confined by infrastructure and bureaucracy and the inability to take risk. That's number one. To get into that kind of environment, companies have to foster a culture that breeds that. In the companies that I've been fortunate enough to be a part of, I've always adopted what I refer to as a sales culture. And I've used the catchphrase that we're all in sales, because we are, whether you're in engineering, whether you're in operations, or whether you're in actually sales. And this is because you have to push an idea. But the culture aspect says that You reward innovation and creativity through all hands meetings, through awards and recognition, through celebration, through drinks after work, through pizza, through highlighting people, and a culture that goes from basically top to bottom that says it's just as important to know what the developer's doing as it is to know what the salesperson is facing in the marketplace. So it's that culture that is the part of this.
Right.
From that culture comes a strategy. And the strategy of the company that leads to innovation and creativity is not a 5-year detailed MBA plan, which we're also good at. It is a strategic foundation that recognizes that what you need first and foremost is unique product or service, product that's differentiated. And that's where this culture has to fashion that. So how do you figure that out? There are other parts of the platform, and I'll come back to that. You find it out by hopefully being in an ecosystem like we are evolving here in Columbia, and I want to come back to this later, that gives you the resources and the capability to say, here's my idea. And you don't have to worry about having to go out and spend $50,000 to file a patent. You can just say, here's my idea. And you feel comfortable that you're going to get feedback. Here's my idea to colleagues. Here's my idea to other business people. What do you think? And then this culture has to hopefully have you have access to resources that you can build an MVP, a minimally viable product. When you go to raise money, you get a lot further if you can show them something rather than telling them something. Here's the software. Here's how it works. Here's what I'm doing. I see some familiar faces in this audience. I see Tradeversity out here. And Mike can actually demonstrate a product right now. That's a good thing. And I believe that this culture of innovation has to have that. So that's part of the platform. By the way, the other parts of the platform have everything to do with competition. But a lot of entrepreneurs and idea creators tend to follow their competition. The real issue here is understanding your competition and then figuring out how you differentiate, and through that product or services roadmap, how you continue to differentiate. Because if you're going to put an idea together, you really ought to go big, nothing small. Go really, really big. And that's what gets people's attention. And you hear people say, well, you know, monopolies are bad. No, they're good. Go big. Try to get a monopoly in your industry. Try to get a monopoly in your sector. Now, you probably won't, but you'll have a lot bigger market share. So those are the things that, that I would urge in this, in getting the deal, all while we've got our deal active on the table. That was a real element of leadership trust violation, in my opinion. And I think entrepreneurs, above all, have to be leaders. So that was a mistake on my part of not having done better due diligence in this issue. I also had a company, we exited, but it wasn't the best exit. And we merged with another company. The VCs who were part of the company that we merged with took all of their money and put it into the new company and put in additional capital into our merged company. The technical co-founder of the company we were merged, the day after the deal was done, resigned.
Whoops.
And the failure there was he should have said during this process, I'm not going to stick it out. I'm not going to go forward. And these investors who had bet on him originally placed another bet on the table, pushed all their chips to the table. I pushed all my chips of my company to the table, and this guy walks. Now, did we recover? Yes. But it was difficult. It was difficult because we had to restart on some of the development. We had to restart in finding another real CTO into the business. And I believe that it cost us market opportunity and market window, and hence the exit was not as optimal as it could be. Those are some examples. There are other examples that are very important. And I've learned this lesson the very hard way. Sometimes, no matter how passionate you are about the opportunity, or how much value that you bring to the table, you just may not be a good fit as the company evolves to another stage. And needing to recognize that and exit gracefully is an art. I think now, after many times, I have mastered that, but there were times when I had not mastered it and learned difficultly.
So, and you spent a good amount of time in the West Coast, which is considered the holy grail of startups.
Yes.
And I'm at a much minuscule level compared to you. I've had similar experience coming from Boston and Silicon Valley. So, and now that you spent the last few years here and you're involved with several startup activities, what's your thought on startups in Columbia, starting startups in Columbia, the talent in Columbia compared to, does the location matter anymore? Or do we have everything we need here to build? We may not be the next Silicon Valley, but if I want to start a company here, and I see several students here, if they want to start a company here, what should they look for, or whether it's pros and cons?
Okay. I'd like to use that question to first frame some observations. I think the state of South Carolina has done an absolutely phenomenal job. And here's the evidence. The evidence is Boeing. The evidence is BMW. The evidence is Michelin. The evidence is Amazon. And there's more. So at the large company level, the state and the Department of Commerce have really done very, very well. Moving down the food chain into the middle market companies, I think there's work to be done there. And I think part of the initiatives that are loosely coalesced around the startup community could be really focused in that area. I think that the opportunity in the startup environment here is dramatically different. I was away for 30 years, actually, 1981 to 2011, is dramatically different than I saw in my visits home from 01 forward. And the difference is there's just so much going on. You've got the initiatives at the university, the startups, the proving grounds, all the things that are associated there. You've got the USC Columbia Technology Incubator. You've got 1 Million Cups. You've got initiatives that my friend Tom Ledbetter is driving through Midlands Tech and the Accelerator program. I believe we could do a better job of coordinating among these entities, because what I think is not done well, even though we talk about a real development process, whether it's incubation or whatever, the hands-on help and guidance to the companies at each stage by people who have experienced it, been there and done it, is needed. And that's very different than the concept or the product creation where you get a lot of students in the room and everybody's brainstorming. This is into how do you roll that business out? How do you create that business model? How do you differentiate? And I believe that we can do a better job there. I also believe that we've got an opportunity in Columbia. And that opportunity is really centered around, if you think about Silicon Valley and you think about mobile apps and you think about iOS and you think about Android and you think about the Windows Phone, and then you move down and you think about .NET and JavaScript, you've really got all of that concentrated out in Silicon Valley. You've got some up in Boston and a little bit in Austin. Well, there's something happening. And I want to paint this in a broad way first. First is Virgin Galactic is about to put Wi-Fi satellites up there. Okay. We've got research going on at the university in nanotechnology, down into the humans, things that communicate with bodies and things that communicate with machines. I think Columbia has the opportunity to develop a real center of excellence and a real innovation and creative concept around the whole Internet of Things. That's somewhere that is it's so fractured, it really hasn't come together anywhere. We should be after that as hard as we possibly can. And that's where I think the state of South Carolina can help. I hear a lot about venture capital, and I hear about monies that have gone into funds that are not domiciled in South Carolina, either in Georgia or either in North Carolina. And yet, even though Charlie Banks is not here tonight, we've got Capital Angels, which is part of the Palmetto Angels, which is affiliated with the Upper Carolina Angel Network. We've got early stage angel companies coming together. Why can't we get the state to put a little risk money? Remember, we got to have a risk profile, comfortable being uncomfortable, comfortable not having the status quo, comfortable not having the bureaucracy. We got to have comfort with that. Why can't we get the state to put 5 or 10 million into Charlie's fund? Then it's professionally managed. Mm-hmm. And it's not managed by, with all due respect, a state employee who has a different set of measures for their success. It's managed by a professional VC who only looks at one thing. How are we going to parse that out? How are we going to find 20 good deals? And how are we going to find that one within the 20 that is the next Google? And I believe within the Internet of Things we have capability of doing that. I think the state of South Carolina can do something else too.
You made some excellent points, and I'm
not through.
Oh, please go ahead. I know, my cue was if you look at me for like 2 seconds, you're done.
No, I didn't pause enough for you to do. I think that part of what creates the venture community is having good deal flow, quality deals. Not just deals that are, well, I'm going to be part-time in this and it's going to be a nice application, but something that's big. And I believe to get that, we need to have experienced people. So I'd like to see the state of South Carolina put some of their dollars that are going into whatever into funding internships, because the experience that the interns need is not in the bureaucratic company. It's not in the mid-cap company. It's in the startup where they're in the wars. But the startups can't afford it. The startups can't afford to pay rent. So that's where the state of South Carolina can help nurture this thing. Okay, I'll stop and let you ask another question.
By the way, no offense taken, not a state employee. No state employees here.
I'm not trying to give offense. By the way, anything I say is not criticism. It's feedback. It's observation.
No, thanks for that. I was just...
That's all right. I'm just tweaking you.
But a couple of things you mentioned, and you're spot on with several of those things you mentioned, because we have been trying to fix those things in whatever way we can. But at least speaking on behalf of the accelerator and the incubator, it's kind of, as if we kind of staged this conversation or something, but we are actually building a connected devices Internet of Things center, like a hardware center at the new facility in the incubator.
That's good.
So, and that's,
But it needs to be broader.
Yes, but we want to plan to start it, as part of the new incubator facility, which is coming.
Just think about those satellites that are going to be up there. Something's got to communicate to them.
Exactly, and we have several companies at the incubator which are into robotics, consumer robotics. The technologies which actually fuel the whole connected devices, Internet of Things.
Well, it makes so much sense, because if you look at the companies like Boeing, you're developing software engineering talent that can feed these galactic Wi-Fis. If you look at companies like Boeing and all of the auto parts manufacturing that feed that really feeds into the manufacturing process of Internet of Things that must communicate. And then if you tie that to the medical/nano area that looks at technology for the human body and how that changes. Really, there's an opportunity here, and somebody needs to grab it and run with it.
We are trying our best. I mean, that's the most promise I can
There is
give
no
right
try.
now.
There's just do.
We're doing it to try.
There is no
Never
try.
mind. It's,
Just got to do it.
but another thing you mentioned, and I wanted to bring it up, was the whole mentorship.
Yes.
People who have done it, been there, done that, and trying to help entrepreneurs. And in fact, again, we turned a leaf around on that with the accelerator. It was a very strong mentorship program which got us into the Global Accelerator Network, and that's something we are heavily focused on. One is individual mentorship. The other thing is the corporate mentorship, where we bring, if it's an insurance tech company, then we want to get Blue Cross to help. Now, I'm throwing examples. If anyone from Blue Cross is here, don't freak out. Or if it's and we reached out to Verizon Wireless, to anything to do with connected devices.
See, I have another idea as it relates to that, and the idea is this. All of the companies that are enticed to come into South Carolina for every good reason, and who benefit from our tax structure and our wage structure, I think part of that deal should also include a contribution to the angel fund to help facilitate the investment which creates these companies and the opportunity, as well as a firm commitment for a number of internships within their company and scholarship internships for companies that can't afford it. That's how you do it, in my opinion.
No, that, again, point well taken, because we are trying to get that. I know you heard the word try, but it's in the plans. I'm just being cognizant of the time. We could just go on, talking about all the whole journey for the past 30 years and the ideas and everything. But I do want to open it up to the audience. So, questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, I'm from the greater DC area, and especially technology startups, obviously with Facebook and all those, the majority happen now. They all start on the East Coast, they go out to Palo Alto and that whole area. Coming down to Columbia, I guess there's really not, I at least haven't seen in my 4 years here, a huge, great deal of that. How long do you think it'll take, in your professional opinion, I guess, until one of those, or this really becomes one of those great cities? Because like you said, there's a lot of great potential, and a lot of things you mentioned, I don't think most of us here have even noticed before, but we haven't really seen it. So if you shed some light on that.
First of all, on the time question, I want to give you an example. My software company that I started when I came back from San Francisco, I started that in Atlanta, but I then moved it to South Carolina with the expectation of benefiting from some of the ecosystem. I didn't see it either. My development ended up in Raleigh, North Carolina, in the Research Triangle Park area. So these things that I've been talking about and what I think can be, the state's done a good job and the Peace Parts have done good jobs, but I believe better coordination will accelerate it. So I believe that we're talking about a 3 to 5 year period to nurture some companies based upon good ideas and really having the right funding opportunities to do that. And out of these internships, hopefully will come a pool of talent that these companies can then call upon. Not only technical talent, but operational talent, and out of that comes the business talent. So I think we're depending upon how quickly we can move from try to do, I think we've got a 3 to 5 year window. I'm happy to help push the wheelbarrow, but it takes bright young folks like most of you. And by the way, this is what I think is particularly inspiring. I look out here and I see faces of people that are starting businesses, faces of people who are interested in starting businesses. And it's I think, our collective job to let you fail if you need to fail, but let you have the resources that give you a chance to succeed. And back to the luck side of it, the one that's lucky will be the Google. The one that's not will go away. That's all right. That's part of it. Most entrepreneurs fail at least 3 times or more before they succeed, Most of them are really, as I mentioned, in their 30s before they really hit it out. But 3 to 5 years. Stick around. See if we can help you.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Challenge us.
Yes, sir.
Any more questions?
Hal, you talked about your failures and your experiences. What was your biggest success to date?
The biggest startup success would be Pantera Networks, which we founded as Pandora, which was sold to D.E. Shaw. That was a good success. My biggest turnaround success with my team would be the PacWest Telecom story from 2007 to 2011, the turnaround that we did there for a company in bankruptcy. Another important startup was in the Australian environment where we ended up selling that company after it had been on the ASX in Australia to the large Japanese state telephone carrier. That was a decent deal. Most recently, the company I was chairman of right here, we exited in July of 2013. This is a Research Triangle Park company, by the way. We exited in 2013 with a nice exit.
A nice exit is. I can see the smile when it said it was a nice exit.
Well, just remember, after all liquidation preferences and your minuscule shares, it's not that much, but nice exits.
Yeah.
Mike.
For students in the audience that are here, as you mentioned, seasoned entrepreneurs tend to, have their success in their 30s after they've failed multiple times. And sometimes you can't control the timing of an idea, right? And so for younger entrepreneurs, we don't have the experience, working, whether it be in corporate America or the job experience. How would you recommend for students in the audience like myself to go out and find mentorship and build relationships, to find people that can be advisors, to provide the right education and the right experience and support that they can couple and then put forth with their idea to help them move forward without failing initially?
Well, first of all, I believe this is the great opportunity among all the varied initiatives from the university all the way through the incubator and the accelerators to really get more hands-on and more in-depth with the guidance, advising, and mentorship. As it relates to where do you find the talent, you go to Million Cups and you meet people. You talk to Charlie Banks and ask to present to Capital Angels and come into the room where there are 30 high net worth individuals or so, and somebody's likely going to take an interest. You ask somebody like me to help you because we've met, and I am, by full disclosure, I'm an advisor to Mike. Happy to do it, by the way, having a lot of fun.
We enjoy having you.
Thank you. But guys like me will find other guys. And if we can't find those other guys, we'll find people who can find them. So it's the network. So putting more nodes on your mentorship network is really what we're talking about here. And as you know, the exponential value of the network increases every node that you add. So.
On that note, I do want to mention Hal has been mentoring in many different ways, and he'll be officially formally involved in several different ways. And we have another mentor over there, Carl McCollister, is one of the mentors in the accelerator, and I'm seeing a few more faces, but that's something which we are focusing heavily really based on several feedback we got, is having mentors from various in industries, fields of expertise. I mean, right now it's concentrated on the accelerator, but we want to open it up to the incubator or in general. And events like this is one of the reasons is to do this, is to connect entrepreneurs with mentors or potential businesses.
Mike, just one other observation. I see Bob Bouye back there. Bob and the Columbia Regional Business Report are doing a really good job of writing more in depth about startups and evolving companies, and I think that's good. I'm going to start soon a column for Bob, and I will write about startup topics and ideas. This hopefully will have other people in the ecosystem become interested. So maybe we'll find some more people. Maybe we'll find some more deals there. Who knows? But that's another part of it.
By the way, Charlie is very happy you gave him a shout out. He's like asking me, Hal, gave me a shout out already. Charlie,
Good.
thanks.
Good.
You had a question?
Now, you had mentioned that you had worked with a co-founder at one point and later found out you guys have different visions for the company, and that in retrospect you would have practiced greater due diligence, make sure you was the right person. So for startup people who are looking for partners now, how would you recommend that they practice due diligence, make sure they get the right partner to work with them?
It's a very good question. In many ways, it's like hiring somebody and checking references. But you want to not overtly check references. You want to talk. You want to find out where these people have been involved, people who've worked with them, what their experience was. That's the obvious thing. Then in a one-on-one or together setting, I think you have to pose tough, hard questions. What if we can't pay you for 6 months? What happens? How are you going to exist? Does this mean you have to go do something else, or can you stay all in? Investors want to know that you're all in and that you're not just participating to collect a check, but that you're really all in to win. And as a founder or co-founder, you need to find that out. So there's an art to it, and this is part of what you don't learn from you learn knowledge about human resources, but you don't learn the skill. You have to face this. So I would very much encourage engagement, and I would encourage using a technique that I'm very fond of. It's sort of a derivative of the Socratic technique where you ask a lot of questions, but I refer to it as creative dissonance. And it basically says that you challenge most things. And you challenge it in a civil way. You challenge it in a way that doesn't cast aspirations on one's integrity, but really causes someone to go 2 or 3 layers deep in their explanation of, this is how I will survive. This is my passion for the business. This is what I'm prepared to do. As long as you know up front what the boundaries are, you should be able to deal with it. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
You had a question?
Yes, ma'am.
As a serial entrepreneur now, when you start a company, are you planning for longevity anymore, or do you have your exit strategy already planned out when you're going to get out?
When you ask someone who's in their 60s if they're planning for longevity, it has a different context. But,
We're planning for long.
yes, we are. That's a very good question, and because I come to most of the opportunities that I'm involved with from the business perspective, I'm looking to build value and exit and liquidate. Now, there are other situations, perhaps a family business, where you may be looking to build that for longevity. And there are many opportunities to build really good businesses, innovative, creative businesses that don't have to go global, that don't have to go out and get, millions of dollars of VC funding. And I believe most of those are built as lifestyle companies where you intend to work, create a framework for other employees, and perhaps even pass it to further generations in your family. So, but for me, it's business, create value, and exit, and what's the maximum valuation that you can exit at given all the circumstances. And this is why, getting back to that point of, if you're going to do it, go big, aim high, the big, hairy, audacious goal, and to create that framework that looks at the product first and the services that increase, understanding your competition, but building your team around that and understanding that that's where the value is going to come. Surrounding yourself and delegating really appropriately. But for me, it's just business and dollars.
Yep, sorry, just last question.
I don't know.
From
All
a
you want?
marketing standpoint, recently, I guess since Zuckerberg, in 2003, Facebook and Twitter and all that's out here, a lot of companies are now going to social media for marketing. But I think we can all agree that face-to-face communication is unparalleled. So I guess I'm trying to compare this to and parallel it to word of mouth advertising. I think most people can do a much better job advertising their company or their product face to face. But how would you go about taking that unique experience and putting it digitally between those networks?
That's a very good question. I might avoid Yelp if I were thinking about the way that references are given on there. I believe that it's very important that the engagement be segmented so that you're understanding who's using LinkedIn and why are they using LinkedIn, who's using Facebook and why are they using Facebook, who's on Twitter, who's on Instagram, who's on Pinterest and the other forms of this. So understanding that and then focusing on this with examples, testimonials are, I think, really good. And certainly the ability to link videos and YouTube into that are going to be excellent. And if all else fails, give them a phone number and let them call you.
Great. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have time for a couple more questions. Any?
Mike?
On the topic of education, there's been a lot of controversy, I guess, maybe controversy is the wrong word. When you compare entrepreneurship to a college education, right? You hear a lot of successful stories, or stories about successful entrepreneurs who drop out of school and they can't balance it. That being said, a lot of entrepreneurs also feel that the urge to leave college. What do you think needs to change in the education system, the higher ed system, to help encourage innovation and entrepreneurship and help provide the right tools and segue them into, being able to build a business in college and also take it on after school, versus saying, well, you're either here to get a degree, here's a piece of paper, or you can drop out?
That's
I know that's very dramatic. So.
No, it's an excellent question. Let me pose a what-if scenario. What if everything you were doing with Tradeversity had earned you true university class credit? What if the interns that you are not able to pay, who are working for some level of class credit through some program either from the large companies that have come into South Carolina and can afford it, or state grants, you were able to have sponsored scholarship interns. And part of your academic teaching becomes the skill and knowledge from that class, and you're learning about sales. You're learning about real marketing. You're learning about management of people, which is very different than the textbook or the case. It's real. My view is if you turn that what-if scenario into this is the opportunity that the Moore School has, this is the opportunity that any other school who really wants to have degreed people create concepts and new businesses, I think that's a way to go about it. It's not the only way. Rarely is there an only answer, but it is an answer, an approach. Does that help?
Definitely.
Who do we talk to?
Something like that would significantly help students.
I think so. It works at every level of education and training, whether you're learning to have an electrical business or a plumbing business, or whether you are learning to be a nurse. Everybody's in sales, so you have to learn how to do that. I think the practical application could be better applied through schooling, particularly at the university level.
Okay. One last question.
Yes, sir.
Hi there. Well, I've also spent the past year living in Hong Kong, doing studying and also working with a couple of companies. And this is also related with education. A company that I work with, they do, they basically go into schools and try to promote intercultural competency skills. And I could see this idea really working here in Columbia and even expanding to the rest of the US. But on top of just school and interning and different things, what kind of steps would you say just to see if this kind of thing would work in order to start something like a company? What would be the first steps in talking or writing the business plan, all that kind of stuff? If I do have some sort of experience and also a sense of urgency, what would you recommend?
I would say, can you sit in front of me in a very lucid, clear conversation, tell me what your idea is? And if you could do it for me, you could do it for anybody else. And I think it's the articulation of that idea. When investors look at a deal, the first thing they want to know is, is that person sitting across from them, can they really explain it in non-technical terms? Can they explain it in terms of the wow part of the market? And I would urge you to work on that. I would urge that you even think about perhaps when I know more about it, I can give you better counsel, but some way of bringing, this is actually what I'm talking about. This is how it would work. And if you're looking for more multicultural experience, I would suggest that you go to the Atlanta International School and get an internship. 178 cultures and languages spoken there.
Wow, okay.
My grandchildren do German.
All right. I speak Chinese. So.
Okay, I think I can speak on behalf of Hal. He'll be available for a few more minutes outside. You're welcome to grab another beverage and talk to him directly. Before we close out, I do want to give some shout out to some entrepreneurs here. I see someone who makes some fantastic popcorns around in the city. Agatha, co-founder, chief of operations. Basically she's the boss at the Cromer's Peanuts. If you want to talk about popcorns or in general anything about entrepreneurship, 1 million cups, she's the lady. I forgot to mention Tom Ledbetter earlier. He's one of our mentors at the accelerator. Significant experience in enterprise sales and technology. He was with Cisco and a bunch of other companies, and he's with the Midlands Tech Enterprise Campus. Anything higher ed, anything tech. And he also taught me how to speak Southern, by the way. And we have Carl over there. He's the founder and CEO of Waterheads. And it won't be an exaggeration if I say disrupting the whole citizen voting, that space. So definitely go and talk to him. They're doing something fantastic in that space. And if you're into some biking, mountain biking, and you get frequently dehydrated, then we have the inventor of Koala Bottle over there, Mr. Anthony Goldman, and he's a tinkerer and inventor. He has some wonderful products and in the pipeline in the store right now. So go and talk to him. And I'm sure there are a few more budding entrepreneurs. My hope is to give you a shout out very soon in the next few editions. So I look forward to seeing you all again. Again, Hal, thank you so much for being very flexible with the schedule last week and this week. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
And he's always there at the 1 Million Cups every Wednesday morning. So a great place to go, hear some great ideas, and of course meet Hal, and more importantly some popcorns and coffee at Cromer's. We have several events like this coming along and pretty much every week. I do want to mention Startup Weekend, by the way. How many of you know Startup Weekend? Wow, this is probably the best response I've ever gotten here. So it's basically, just for the uninitiated, build a startup in a weekend. That's as simple as it gets. Friday, pitch an idea. By Sunday, you'll have a product, a business model, vetted by the best of the people like Hal and a bunch of others who have been there, done that. They'll help you through the 48 hours. And you'll walk away with a startup that you've built or you've been part of. You don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to be a developer. It's open for everyone, designer, developers, marketers, social media gurus, anything. You can definitely be a part of a startup team. And the best way to know about it is just spend a weekend. This has been done several times over, all across the world. This is the first time it's happening in Colombia. It's happening on November 14th. We made sure that we'll play the Gamecock game on Saturday, so don't worry about it. You'll have plenty of food and beverages to fuel you through the 48-hour window. We'll have the best of the people in the Midlands region come and help you with your idea. So if you ever sit thinking, oh, I had that idea 4 years ago, I should have done it. Or I have this idea, I don't know if it's going to work. There's a chance to test it out. The worst that can happen that weekend is you'll know exactly how to build a startup or test a startup or your idea or build someone else's idea. So if you have more questions about it, talk to me or Carl again after this, and we are more than happy to tell you about it. And especially students, you have no excuse, seriously. Okay, so you should be there. And I do want to thank you. All this is happening because of Ideology, and I'll let Carl take that again on behalf of Ideology. And our sponsors, the Office of Economic Engagement at the university, the USA Technology Incubator, and the USC Startup, which is part of the Office of Economic Engagement. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all again next month, and we'll announce the speaker. We hope you'll make it again, despite, I hope it won't snow next time, although there won't be any fire here. We'll give you enough notice, and yeah, if you have any feedback, any suggestions, any comments, any referrals, please let us know. And thank you again for making it, or trying to make it last week and making it this week. Have a great evening. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.